when self-employed, you're managing your own tax as opposed to PAYE. How do you go about keeping records for things like that?
Well, getting on top of your paperwork is an absolute must. There's several things that trip businesses up in the early years, and the survey done on why businesses failed revealed that one of I think it was the second most common reason, was failure to deal with tax affairs properly. So the way of tackling that particular problem is actually very easy. You need, at an early stage, to sit down with either an accountant or a bookkeeper, work out what records you need to keep, get yourself a system, and start to become a receipt and paperwork hoarder. Now, that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. For certain disciplines, it's very, very easy, very straightforward. But we're not talking about something overly complicated here. It's simply at the start a lever arch file, some dividers, a fairly simple system of keeping your invoices, so invoices out to customers of what you sell, keeping your purchase receipts, keeping all those stubs. Get a system and keep it, and then review it fairly early with an accountant or a bookkeeper. Now, the two things that I've just mentioned there, accountant and bookkeeper, are quite different, and I wonder if you've had a chance to think yet about whether you need one, both, or whether actually you've decided that you don't need any at all.
I would prefer to know what the difference is. What would an accountant provide that a bookkeeper wouldn't, and vice versa? What is the difference?
Okay, well, let's just separating it out at the moment. Somebody who's setting up a self-employed or a sole trader, as opposed to a company, and perhaps we'll come on to a company at another session or at another time. A lot of self-employed people or sole traders can keep the books and records and can complete the tax return themselves. Now, that might come as a bit of a surprise to you, but I believe with some training, some knowledge, it can be done. So one of the things that the Revenue are now very keen to do is help support startup businesses, and there will be a local business support unit of the Inland Revenue near you. The details are on the Inland Revenue website, and they offer courses and seminars to help people that are starting up in business for the first time. The feedback that I'm getting from clients and contacts is that those courses have improved in quality over the last few years. They are free, and they'll take you through things that I've just been talking about, the sort of files you need to keep, the records that you need to keep, things like how long do I need to keep them? So for instance, some people may think, well, after I put my tax return in, and after a year has passed, that's the end of it. Well, there's an element of truth to that, but actually the Revenue can go back up to 6 years after a year end. So that idea that you had of getting rid of the file and getting rid of those records after a couple of years, you could be creating a really big problem for yourself. So little hints and tips like that, what you need to keep the things for 6 years, will come from those free courses. But let's decide then that you've been to some of those courses and you think, paperwork, bookkeeping, it's just not for me. And I don't know how you feel about that. But the options that you go down to then is maybe you get a bookkeeper to help you. Maybe even in the first year, and after a while you might decide either that the bookkeeper becomes indispensable, or that you can do it yourself. Bookkeepers, in my experience, charge between £15 and £23 an hour. Lots of bookkeepers available. For instance, your local Yellow Pages. My preference though is always to get a recommendation from somebody else. Maybe you've got a friend, a mate that runs their own business. Ask them if they've got a bookkeeper. Recommendations are the best way. The bookkeeper in the world of running your own business is in charge of the paperwork. They're in charge of keeping the documents, writing up what the documents say in a legible way, in a clear way, so that accounts can subsequently be prepared. Now, let's separate out the bookkeeper from somebody like myself, chartered accountant, qualified accountant. What's really great for me is working with a client that's on top of their paperwork, or they've got working with a good bookkeeper, because if they give me a clean set of records, it makes my job, which is reviewing, preparing statutory accounts, or preparing accounts, and preparing the tax return a lot easier. If it's easier for me, my fees come down, happy client. it just makes so much sense.